Hello there and welcome back to another CPD talk. So today we have another quarterly transfusion update. I know it says June on there. It is not going to be released by June, so I apologise, but I have been writing it for a while. So just so you're aware, the document number on this has now changed because it's been moved over to the generic tree. It's up in the top if you need to find it. What we're going to go through today, we've only got one case study today because Thais from Dartford is going to be doing a whole separate presentation on the ridiculous number of interesting case studies that they have had at DVH. So I'm sure that's going to be a very exciting talk, but I didn't want to duplicate the information. We then have two different types of CAPs to go through. The first one is to do with communication, and the second one is the importance of checking patients' special requirements. And then finally, we actually have two amazing positive learnings to take home from this talk today. So that is great. So let's get started with the first case study. So we had a patient come in for a laparoscopy in June 2021. And as part of their preoperative care, a group and save sample was taken and sent to the laboratory. This gave not only a positive antibody screen, but also a pan-reactive reverse grouping result. So you can see this down in the bottom right-hand corner. Their forward group looks like a group A positive. Their reverse group is positive in both the A1 and the B cells, so it looks like a group O. And I know you can only see the first screening cell, but the subsequent screening cells were positive, and that's why the antibody screen result says positive. So the BMS who was on shift performed a warm group to try to correct the reverse grouping result. However, after 2 attempts, it did not resolve itself. We then also performed a panel and the RHK phenotype, as is our protocol. So you can see here where it says blood group, it's still put down as not known because we couldn't correct it. The DAT was negative, the K, and then it's got the RH and K phenotype. The panel was negative by AAT but positive by enzyme, and this is where it gets interesting. The enzyme reactions indicated an anti-P1, so you can see the reactions aren't dead on what you would expect, they're weaker, but the differences between the reactions are very similar to what you would expect in a patient who has an anti-P1. This is interesting because anti-P1 is normally an IgM antibody, which would react at room temperature. It is therefore possible that the reasons for the grouping anomalies are down to this antibody interfering with the grouping results. This is more common with anti-M reacting at room temperature, however it can occur with several other antibodies. And whilst the panel was run at 37 degrees, our results were weak, so it could still be indicative of an IgM antibody. Room temperature antibodies affect the reverse grouping when the following parameters are met. The most important is that the reagent red cells, the A1 and the B cells, have the corresponding antigens on their cell membrane, and the next that the antibody is an IgM antibody, and that's because IgM reacts best at room temperature, and the blood group is performed at room temperature. It's not incubated at 37 degrees. In the case of the P1 antigen, 79% of Caucasians and 94% of blacks have this antigen on their red blood cells. It is therefore possible that this is an anti-P1 interfering with the grouping results if the reagents have the antigen for P1, which given those percentages is likely. If the antibody screen was negative and you suspected a room temperature antibody interacting with the grouping results, then you can run the normal panel used in your laboratory, but instead of incubating at 37, you would incubate at room temperature. In this case, we didn't perform the room temperature panel as we didn't have enough sample, and it's not part of our standard procedure. However, it is important to be aware of how antibodies can interact with the grouping results. You can see why this is an interesting case because you have not only the antibody but also it interacting possibly with the group. We're now going to move on to CAPAs. So the first one is communication is key. So what has happened is in the lab we've had a few incidents where people have had issues and have resolved these without passing on the information to the senior team. Now, while we do encourage people to come up with resolutions which enable the service to continue to run and keep BT going, if you don't tell us, then we can't ensure the risks are properly assessed, we can't make sure that this is the right methods to fix the problem, and we can't follow up or chase with other departments to put in a long-term fix. So please tell us if you have analyzers issues, even if you fixed it, if you run out of reagents or other consumables, even if you've managed to find replacements from elsewhere, or if you have a broken device which is still working, because it may work at this point, but we don't know what the long-term impact is. It just ensures that we can help you to provide the best possible service for the patients. We're then going to move on to the second type of kappa. There have been several incidents recently where blood has been issued or ordered missing certain patient requirements. This has included emergency O-negative units that were not K-neg, pheno-matched units where the pheno was incorrect, and blood for a pregnant lady that was not CMV negative. It's so important that when you're ordering or cross-matching blood for patients, or the emergency blood, that you are checking that you have met their requirements. If you don't do this, it could have a serious impact on the patient who has the blood. The impacts, if we have a look at them, is if the emergency O-negative units that were not K-neg were given to a woman of childbearing age, this could lead to the development of anti-K, which could cause HDFN if she decides to have a child. It also increases the risk of a HTR if the patient is unknown and it turns out that they have an anti-K, then you're going to have a transfusion reaction. Pheno-matched units where the pheno was incorrect. Again, if the pheno relates to the patient's own antibodies, then you could cause a HTR. And finally, if this is a subsequent requirement because they are multiply transfused, then you could cause them to develop a new antibody. And lastly, blood for a pregnant lady that was not CMV negative. CMV is normally harmless for healthy children and adults. However, it can be fatal for babies, including fetuses, and immunocompromised patients. Whilst in most cases it won't cause harm, it's still an important requirement to take on board. The next time you order or cross-match, double and triple check the patient's special requirements or the trust/the laboratory protocol to ensure that we're giving the best blood that we can be giving to that patient. Now that we've got the horrible kappas out of the way, let's move on to our lovely positive learning, my favourite part. So we have a couple of positive learning cases today, and we're going to start by discussing the taking the initiative and how helpful this can be. So every month in Blood Transfusion at Medway, we send reports through to our finance team. These are about the cross matches and batch products that are used throughout the month. This month, so we got this email. I have a query with the M2 blood report that I hope you can help me with. There is an entry against chemical pathology, please see below. I don't recognise the name blank. Are you able to confirm who this is? Could it be someone at DVH? Also, we don't normally see entries against chemical pathology either, so I'm wondering if this entry is correct or not. Now, the staff member who receives these reports obviously has noticed this new entry and sent this through to the senior staff whilst copying in a couple of other members of staff in the laboratory. The senior responded to this and explained that she was working from home, so wouldn't be able to look into this until she was back on site. However, that she was uncertain of how easy it would be to look up a specific patient as the data is anomalized in the reporting. So the response was, I can review the data tomorrow, but my assumption is that a member of staff has booked in the information onto our LIMS incorrectly. We have several members of staff in training, so it could have happened. And without further information, which is not generated part of this report, it'll be difficult to confirm that it's due to an error. So I can check to ensure that the correct report function has been used, although my assumption is that it will have been. But if it has, there probably isn't going to be much we can do to correct it this month. If it is due to staff error, then I can communicate to staff to prevent this from happening in future. After the senior had sent this email out, the member of staff who had originally produced the report and therefore was copied into this response actually managed to find the patient's request form, which confirmed that the clinician's name was in fact White. So despite the senior member of staff saying that she would look into this at a later date, they did this off of their own back. This has then saved the time because it meant that we got to go back to this member of staff very quickly, and it showed that if there is an error, then it's probably in how the limbs were set up. So it was very, very useful, and it helped out in the long run a lot more, because let's be honest, the senior would have probably come in the next day and just completely forgotten that they'd said they would deal with it, because there's always 100 other things on our minds, right? So this was great. It really helped out, and it was something small at the time that will have a big impact. We then want to highlight how amazing some of the teamwork has been recently. As our analysers are getting closer and closer to the end of their life, and we continue to get new staff into our departments, it has been proving to be a difficult year. There are increasing bouts of downtime, increased training pressures, and lots of competencies to complete, all whilst trying to maintain the normal service requirements in blood transfusion. You've all been working really well together to overcome these obstacles and have proven how great of a team you are, organising yourself effectively and mentoring those that need it. So well done, and thank you for all your hard work. When you help each other like this, it makes it easier for everyone involved and makes the ongoing stresses happening in the laboratory easier to manage. Hopefully, as we move forward with the new analyzer, the strains upon you will reduce, and as staff continues to progress, our workforce will become more stable. We've had some amazing learning points in this talk, whether they're about communication, rarer antibodies, the importance of checking patient requirements, or how important working together is. I'd like to thank you all for listening to this, and I look forward to the next talk. I'd also like to thank everyone who's provided material for this talk. It's always useful to have anything interesting thrown my way, so if you do come up with any interesting case studies over the coming months, please remember to highlight them to me, and then maybe they'll be in this talk. Similarly, if you see someone doing something that you think is really good practice and should be highlighted, then I would also love to have that information so we can celebrate that and learn from that together. So thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to the next one. Bye!